In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
It is useless to wait for a breakthrough, for the revolution, the nuclear apocalypse, or the social movement. To go on waiting is madness. The catastrophe is not coming. It is here. We are already situated within the collapse of civilization. It is within this reality that we must choose sides.
The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey, recording deep underneath the Stigmata Studios building in the steel buckle of the Rust Belt. I'm John Towers, and this is the Abracast. So we're doing something a little bit different this evening, and I want to just jump right into it. So here's to you, my Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. Thank you guys for your generosity and your support. If you're interested in supporting the show, please check out the website. Also, this month's Fellow Craft episode is part 3 of Atlantis. We went through and talked about examples of Atlantis in the Bible and other ancient traditions. It was a fun episode. Here's to you guys. Plus, as you might be listening to, as the day of this release, I will be doing the Water of the Art operation this evening. If you're interested in that, check out the website. It's like wizard water. It's like holy water, but like for fucking wizards. Is pretty cool. So the book we're talking about, I bought this book a long time ago, and I read it, and it disgusted me. And I threw it on my shelf, and I'm like, one day I'm going to have to do this. Well, as I'm looking at it, I'm like, I'm going to have to fucking do this for the show. So I'm looking at the riots. I'm not looking at the protests. You know, I haven't really weighed in on this whole thing because I don't want to say I'm sophisticated enough to have seen this coming, but of course these things were going to turn into riots because that's what they do. People take advantage of these movements and they exploit them, and maybe we'll even talk about some of that stuff tonight. So, this book is called The Coming Insurrection. It was written by apparently a couple French anarchists, the Invisible Committe, they're called. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time splitting hairs about anarchy and communism. It seems clear in this book that they present themselves as anarchists, but in some other places they sort of tilt their hand on dictatorship or, you know, totalitarianism. So, you know, maybe we'll talk about that as we bump up against these things. And the same thing can be said for Antifa, which is the thing everybody's talking about nowadays, which is why I'm sitting down here tonight reading this book for you. It is French, so I have to apologize in advance. I don't speak French. I don't speak Frenchese, so I am not going to on purposely mangle any of these words. I'll try my best to get through them. And also, because it's French, a lot of the historical and kind of cultural references are obviously French. The one thing in particular that jumps right out towards the beginning is the Paris riots of 2005. This is when they were flipping cars over and burning them, and they actually accidentally put some of that in context as they go through this. So we're just going to jump on in here. Oh, another thing that's a little bit different is this book is relatively new. It was published in 2009, and you're like, well, it's not really new. And I'm like, well, look, bros, for me, it's new. Usually I deal with books that are in the public domain. That's how I can sleep at night. However, since these guys are anarcho-communists or anarchists at the least, I don't know how that stacks up in case, like, which is worse, anarchism or communism. Well, shit, if it was 16-year-old John Towers, it would be anarchy all the way, all day, hey. Not so much of the communism, but anyhow, but this is protected. There is all rights reserved. No parts of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, transmitted by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise without permission of the publisher. So, with that being said, if a bunch of fucking Frenchy anarcho-communists want to send me a cease and desist form, the ball's in your court. All right, sorry about that. I had to take a break and deal with this fucking notifications. You get one of these smart speakers, and I got a couple tablets floating around. And my Chromebook, I don't know what fucking thing is making what fucking. It's like wading through a small squad of R2D2s. All right, let's get into this. From whatever angle you approach it, the present offers no way out. This is not the least of its virtues. From those who seek hope above all, it tears away every firm ground, and those who claim to have solutions are contradicted almost immediately. Everyone agrees that things can only get worse. The future has no future, is the wisdom of an age that, for all its appearance of perfect normalcy, has reached the level of consciousness of the first punks. I believe they're talking about Dadaism. God damn it. Dadaism. That's many years of art history raising its ugly head right there. The sphere of political representation has come to a close. From left to right, it's the same nothingness striking the pose of an emperor or a savior. The same sales assistant adjusting their discourse according to the findings of the latest survey. Bill Clinton used to call that triangulation. Those who still vote seem to have no other intention than to desecrate the ballot box by voting as a pure act of protest. We're beginning to suspect that it is only against voting itself that people continue to vote. Nothing we're being shown is adequate to the situation, not by far. It is very silence. The populace seems infinitely more mature than all these puppets bickering among themselves about how to govern it. The ramblings of any Bellevue Chilbani contain more wisdom in all the declarations of our so-called leaders. So a Chibani is Arabic for an old man. Here it's referring to the old men who play backgammon in the cafes of Belleville, which is a largely immigrant neighborhood in Paris. Hence the 2005 riots. The lid on the social kettle is triple tight, and the pressure inside continues to build. From out of Argentina, the specter of Que se vayan todos is beginning to seriously hunt the ruling class. The flames of November 2005 still flicker in everyone's mind. Those first joyous fires were the baptism of a decade full of promise. The media fable of Belleville versus the Republic. Many may work, but what it gains in effectiveness, it loses in the truth. Fires were lit in the city centers, but this news was methodically suppressed. Whole streets in Barcelona burned in solidarity, but no one knew about it apart from the people living there. And it's not even true that the country has stopped burning. Many different profiles can be found among the arrested, with little that unites them besides a hatred for existing society, not class, not race, not even neighborhood. What was new wasn't the Benelux revolt, since it was already gone in the 80s, but the break with the established forms. The assailants no longer listened to anybody, neither to their big brothers and big sisters, nor to the community organizations charged with overseeing the return to normal. No SOS racism could sink its cancerous roots into this event, whose apparent conclusion can be credited only to fatigue, falsification in the media, or Moretta. This whole series of nocturnal vandalisms and anonymous attacks, this wordless destruction has widened the breach between politics and the political. No one can honestly deny the obvious. This was an assault that made no demands, a threat without a message, and it had nothing to do with politics. One would have to be oblivious to the autonomous youth movements of the last 30 years not to see it purely political character of the resolute negation of politics. Like lost children, we trashed the prized trinkets of society that deserves no more respect than the monuments of Paris. Damn, at the end of the bloody week, and knows it. So the battle, or the bloody week, you might recall maybe 2 months ago or 3 months ago, we did this whole thing about the Paris Commune in 1871. That's what this is referring to. This is actually going to be like a cool little side piece to that. So you might want to revisit that episode. You can hit it up on, I think, the history section of the feature topic links. Back to it. There will be no social solution to the present situation. First, because of the vague aggregate of social milieus, institutions, and individualized bubbles that is called, with a touch of anti-fascist society, has no consistent. Second, because there's no longer any language for common experience, and we cannot share wealth if we do not share language. God damn, it took half a century of struggle around the Enlightenment to make the French Revolution possible, and a century of struggle around work to give birth to the fearsome welfare state. Struggles create the language in which a new order expresses itself, but there is nothing like that today. Europe is now a continent going broke that shops secretly at discount stores and has no fly budget airlines if it wants to travel at all. No problems framed in social terms admit of a solution. The questions of pensions and of job security and of young people and their violence can only be held in suspense, while the situation these words serve to cover up is continually policed for signs of further unrest. Nothing can make it an attractive prospect. No attractive prospect to wipe the asses of pensioners for minimum wage, those who have found less humiliation and more advantage in a life of crime than in sweeping floors, will not turn in their weapons. Their prisons won't teach them to love society. Cuts to their monthly pension will undermine the desperate pleasure-seeking of hordes of retirees, making them stew and splutter about in the refusal to work among an ever larger segment of youth. And finally, no guaranteed income granted the day after a quasi-uprising will be able to lay the foundation of a new deal, a new pact, a new peace. This social feeling has already evaporated too much for that. As an attempt an attempted solution to pressure to ensure that nothing happens together with police surveillance of the territory will only intensify. The unmanned drone that flew over Saint Denis last July 14th, the police later confirmed, presents a much more vivid image of the future than all the fuzzy humanistic projections. That they were careful to assure us that the drone was unarmed, gives us a clear identification of the road we're headed down. The territory will be partitioned into ever more restricted zones, highways built around the borders of problem neighborhoods already form invisible walls closing off those areas from the middle-class subdivisions. Whatever defenders of the Republic may think, the control of neighborhoods by the community is manifestly the most effective means available. The purely metropolitan sections of the country, the main city centers, will go about their opulent lives in ever more crafty, more sophisticated, ever more simmering deconstruction. They will illuminate the whole planet with their glaring neon lights as patrols of the BAC, that's the Brigade of Anti-Criminalante, and private security companies like paramilitary units proliferate under the umbrella of increasingly shameful judicial protection. The impasse of the present everywhere in evidence of everywhere denied. There will be no end of psychologists, sociologists, and literary hacks applying themselves to the case, each with a specialized jargon from which the conclusions are especially absent. It's enough to listen to the songs of the time, the asinine alt-folk, where the pretty bourgeoisie dissects the state of its soul next to the declarations of war from Mafia K1 Fry. I don't know what that is. It's a popular French rap group. Great. To know that a certain coexistence will end soon, that a decision is near. The book is signed in the name of an imaginary collective. Its contributors are not its authors. They were content merely to introduce a little order to the commonplaces of our time, collecting some of the murmurings around barroom tables and behind closed bedroom doors. They've done nothing more than lay down a few necessary truths whose universal repressions fill a psychiatric hospital with patients and eyes with pain, and they've made themselves scribes to the situation. It is the privileged feature of a radical circumstance that a rigorous application of logic leads to revolution. It's enough just to say what is before our eyes and not to shrink from the conclusions. First circle. I am what I am. So this is the way this book is broken down. It has like an introduction, and then it has this from every angle chapter, I guess, and then it has 7 chapters it calls circles. Yeah, it goes first circle to 7th circle, and then it has a chapter called Get Going. It has a chapter called Finding Each Other. It has a chapter called Get Organized, and it has a chapter called Insurrection. So, spoiler alert. I am what I am. This is the marketing's latest offering to the world, the final stage in the development of advertising. Far beyond all the exhortations to be different, to be oneself and to drink Pepsi, decades of concepts in order to get where we are, to arrive at pure tautology. I equals I. He's running on a treadmill in front of the mirror in his gym. She's coming back from work behind the wheel of her smart car. Will they meet? I am what I am. My body belongs to me. I am me. You are you. And something is wrong. Mass personalization, individualization, and All conditions, life, work, and misery diffuse schizophrenia, rampant depression, atomization into fine heroic particles, hysterization of contact. The more I want to be me, the more I feel an emptiness. The more I express myself, the more I am drained. The more I run after myself, the more tired I get. We treat ourselves like a boring box office. We've become our own representatives in a strange commerce, guarantors of a personalization that feels in the end a lot more like an amputation. We insure ourselves to the point of bankruptcy with a more or less disguised clumsiness. Meanwhile, I manage the quest for a self, my blog, my apartment, my latest fashionable crap relationship dramas, who's fucking who, whatever prosthesis it takes to hold on to a quote I, unquote. If society hadn't become much of a definitive abstraction, then it would denote all existential crutches that allow me to keep dragging on. The ensemble, the dependence I've contracted as the price of my identity. The handicapped are the model citizen of tomorrow. It's not without foresight that the association exploiting them today demand that they be granted a subsistence income. The injunction everywhere to be someone, maintain the pathological state that makes this society necessary. The injunction to be strong produces the very weakness by which it maintains itself. So everything seems to take on a therapeutic character, even working, even love. All those how's it goings that we exchange give the impression of a society composed of patients talking to each other and taking each other's temperature. Sociability is now made up of thousands of little niches, 1,000 little refuges where you can take shelter, where it is always better than the bitter cold outside. There's everything's false, since it's all just a pretext of getting warmed up, where nothing can happen since we're all too busy shivering silently together. Soon the society will be only be held together by mere tension of all the societal atoms straining towards an illusory cure. It's a powerful plant that runs its turbines on a gigantic reservoir of unwept tears, always on the verge of spilling over. I am what I am. Never has domination found such an innocent-sounding slogan, the maintenance of the self in a permanent state of deterioration, in the chronic state of near collapse. It is the best-kept secret of the present order of things. The weak, depressed, the self-critical, the virtual self is essential. The virtual self is essentially that endless, adaptable subject required by the ceaseless innovation of production, the accelerated obsolescence of technology, the constant overturning of social norms, the generalized flexibility. It is at the same time the most voracious consumer, and paradoxically, the most productive self. Remember to turn your tiles black, everybody. Who isn't wearing the ribbon? The one that will most eagerly and energetically throw thyself into the slightest project, only to return later to its original larval state. What am I, then? Since childhood, I've been involved with flows of milk, smells, stories, sounds, emotions, nursery rhymes, substance, gestures, ideas, impressions, gazes, songs, and food. What am I? I'm tied in every way to places, sufferings, ancestors, friends, loves, events, languages, memories, to all kinds of things that obviously are not me. Everything that attaches me to this world, all the links that constitute me. All the forces that compose me don't form an identity. A thing displayable on cue, but a singular, shared, living existence from which emerges at a certain times and places that being which says I. Our feelings of inconsistency is simply a consequence of this foolish belief that impermanence of the self and the little care we give to what makes us who we are. It's dizzying to see Reebok's, quote, I am what I am, unquote, enthroned atop a Shanghai skyscraper. The West everywhere rolls out its favorite Trojan horse, the exasperating anonymity between the self and the world, the individual and the group, between attachment and freedom. Freedom isn't the act of shedding our attachments, but the practical capacity to work on them, to move around in their space and to form or dissolve them. The family only exists as a family. That is a hell for those who've quit trying to alter its deliberating mechanisms or don't know how to. The freedom to uproot oneself has always been a phantasmic freedom. We can't rid ourselves of what binds us without at the same time losing the very thing to which our forces would be applied. I am what I am, then, is not simply a lie, simple advertising campaign, but it's a military campaign, a war cry directed against everything that exists between beings, against everything that circulates indistinctly, everything that invisibly links them, everything that prevents complete desolation, against everything that makes us exist and ensures that the whole world doesn't everywhere have the look and the feel of a highway, an amusement park, or a new town, pure boredom, passionless, but with well-ordered, empty, frozen space where nothing moves apart from its registered bodies, molecular automobiles, and ideal commodities. France wouldn't be the land of anxiety pills that it has become, the paradise of antidepressants, the mecca of neuroses, if it weren't also the European champion of hourly productivity. Sickness, fatigue, depression can be seen as the individual symptoms of what needs to be cured. They contribute to the maintenance of the existing order, to my docile adjustment to idiotic norms, and the modernization of my crutches. They specify the selection of my opportune, compliant, and productive tendencies, as well as those that must be gently discarded. It's never too late to change, you know. But taken as facts, my failings can also lead to the dismantling of the hypothesis of the self. They then become acts of resistance in the concurrent war. They become a rebellion and a force against everything that conspires to normalize us, to amputate us. The self is not something within us that is in a state of crisis. It is the form they mean to stamp upon us. Wow, man, that's mind-blowing. They want to make our self something sharply defined, separate, accessible in terms of quality, controllable, when in fact we are creatures among creatures, singularities among similars, living flesh, weaving the flesh out of the world, contrary to what has been repeated to us since childhood. Intelligence doesn't mean knowing how to adapt, or if that's a kind of intelligence, it's the intelligence of slaves. Our inadaptability, our fatigue are the only problems from the standpoint of what aims to subjugate us. They indicate rather a starting point, a meeting point of our new complexities. They reveal a landscape more damaged, but infinitely more shareable than all of the fantasy lands this society maintains for its purpose. We are not depressed, we're on strike. For those who refuse to manage themselves, depression is not a state, but it's a passage. It's a bowing out, a sidestep towards political disaffiliation. From then on, medication and the police are the only possible forms of conciliation. This is why they present society doesn't hesitate to impose Ritalin on its overactive children or strap people into lifelong dependencies on pharmaceuticals, and why it claims to be able to detect behavioral disorders at age 3, because everywhere the hypothesis of the self is beginning to crack.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
The water of the art operation. So using the Magus, the celestial intelligencer, and operations from the Greater Key of Solomon and the Bible, I'm going to be preparing a large bottle of water of the art. It's kind of like holy water, but it's way cooler. Check it out. This is what the Greater Key of Solomon says. And know that wheresoever thou shalt sprinkle this water, it will chase away all phantoms, and they shall be unable to hinder or annoy anyone. With this same water thou shalt make all the preparations of the art. So I'm going to be collecting the ingredients needed for the operation on the days and hours specified in the book, and I'm going to perform the operation Wednesday, June 3rd at 11 p.m. And I'm also going to charge the water of the art under the full moon of June 6th. If you're interested in obtaining some of this water of the art, all you have to do is join the Patreon or subscribe star at the $10 tier. Being a supporter of the show on these platforms will also get you access to videos and bonus audio related to the operation. And I'm like, who wouldn't want some dope wizard water? The second circle. Entertainment is a vital need. The government that declares a state of emergency against 15-year-old kids, a country that takes refuge in the arms of a football team, a cop in the hospital bed complaining about being the victim of an assault, the perfect issuing a decree against a building of tree houses, 2 10-year-olds in Chile charged with burning down a video game arcade. Our era excels in certain situational absurdity that it never seems to recognize. The truth is that a plaintive, indignant tones of the news media are unable to stifle the burst of laughter that greets these headlines. A burst of laughter is the only appropriate response to the serious questions posed by news analysis. To take the most banal, there is no immigration question. Who still grows up where they were born? Who lives where they grew up? Who works where they live? Who lives where their ancestors did? And whom did the children of this era belong? To television or their parents? The truth is that we have been completely torn from any belongings. We are no longer from anywhere. And as a result, in addition to a new disposition to tourism is an undeniable suffering. Our history is one of colonization, of migrations, of wars and exiles. The destruction of all its roots is the story of everything that made us foreigners in this world. Yes, in our own family, we have expropriated from our own language, by education, from our songs, by reality TV contests, from our flesh, by mass pornography, from our city, by the police, and from our friends, by wage labor. To this, we should add in France the relentless, age-old work of individualization by the power of the state that classifies, compares, disciplines, and separates its subjects, starting from a very young age, that instinctively grinds down the solidarities that escape it until nothing remains except citizenship, a pure, phantasmic sense of belonging to the Republic. The Frenchman, more than anyone else, is embodiment of this dispossessed, the destitute. His hatred of foreigners is of peace with his hatred of himself as a foreigner. The mixture of jealousy and fear he fears towards the cités, which are housing projects typically in impoverished areas such as Benevolu, expresses nothing but resentment for all he has lost. He can't help envying these so-called problem neighborhoods where there still persists a bit of communal life, a few links between beings, some solidarities not controlled by the state, an informal economy, an organization that is not yet detached from those who organize themselves. We have arrived at a point of privation where the only way to feel French is to curse the immigrants and those who are more visibly foreign in this country. The immigrant assume a curious position of sovereignty. If they weren't here, the French might stop existing. France is a product of its schools and not the inverse. We live in an extensively scholastic country where one remembers taking the baccalaureate. I'm just going to fake it, okay? The baccalaureate exam as a defining moment. Retired people still tell you about their failure 40 years earlier in such and such an exam and how it screwed up their whole career, their whole life for a century and a half. The national school system has been producing a type of state subjectivity that stands out among all others. People who accept competition provide the playing field is level, who expect in life that each person be rewarded as in a contest according to their merit, who always ask permission before talking, who silently respect culture and the rules, and those with the best grades, even their attachment to their great critical intellectuals and their rejection of capitalism are stamped by this love of school. It's this construction, this subjectivities by the state that it's breaking down every day a little bit more. With the decline of scholarly institutions, the reappearance over the past 20 years of a school and a culture of the street in competition with the school of the Republic and its cardboard culture is the most deepest trauma that French universalism is presently undergoing. On this point, there is no disagreement between extreme right and most virulent left. The name Jules Ferry, the minister of theirs during the crushing of the Commune, the theoretician of the colonization, should be enough, however, to render this institution suspect. For we see teachers from some citizens' vigilance committee come on the evening news to whine about their school being burned down. We remember how many times as children we dreamt of doing exactly this. as children, you dreamt of doing that. When we hear leftist intellectuals venting about barbarism of groups of kids harassing passerbys on the street, shoplifting, burning cars, playing cat and mouse with riot police, we remember what they said about the greasers in the 50s, or better, the Apaches in the Belle Aquamph. So the generic name of Apaches, writes a judge at the Sign Tribunal in 1907, has for the past few years been a way of labeling all dangerous individuals enemies of society without nation or family, deserters of all duties, ready for the most audacious confrontations and for any sort of attack on persons and properties. These gangs who flee work, who adopt the names of their neighborhoods and confront the police, are the nightmare of the good, the individualized French citizen. They embody everything that he has renounced. All the possible joy we'll never experience. There is something impertinent about the existing in a country where a child singing as she pleases is inevitably silenced with a, quote, "Stop! You're going to stir things up," unquote, where scholastic consternation unleashes floods of well-mannered employees. The aura that persists around Mazarin, who is a legendary French outlaw, 1936 to 1979, has less to do with his uprightness and his audacity than with the fact that he took it upon himself to enact a vengeance on what we should all avenge, or rather on what we should avenge directly, when instead we continue to hesitate and defer endlessly, because there is no doubt that in 1,000 imperceptible and undercover ways, in all sorts of slanderous remarks and every spiteful little expression and venomous politeness, the Frenchman continues to avenge permanently and against everyone the fact that he's resigned himself to being crushed. It is about time that "fuck the police" replaced "yes sir, officer." In this sense, the open hostility of certain gangs only express, in a slightly less muffled way, the poisonous atmosphere, the rotten spirit, the desire for salvational destruction by which the country is consumed. Salvational destruction. I need to underline that. Hold on. I need to come back to that one. Salvational destruction. That reminds me of Baltimore. I guess, what was it? Freddie Gray riots? When they're like, we'll give them room to destroy. We'll give them space to destroy. And then once everyone was like, "What did you say, Mayor? That is crazy." She was like, "Oh, no, I didn't say that shit." And no one was like, "Yeah, but you need to listen to this recording where we recorded you saying it." To call this population of strangers in the midst of which we live society is such a usurpation that even sociologists wonder if they should abandon a concept that was, for a century, their bread and butter. Now they prefer a metaphor of a network to describe the connection of cybernetic solitudes, the intermeshing of weak interactions under names like college, contact, buddy, colleague, acquaintance, or date. Such networks sometimes condense into a milieu which nothing is shared but codes, and where nothing is played out except the incessant recomposition of identity. It would be a waste of time to deal all that is moribund in existing social relations. They say the family is coming back. The couple is coming back, but the family that's coming back is not the same one that went away. Its return is nothing but a deepening of the prevailing separation that is serves to mask becoming what it thought was this masquerade. Everyone can testify that to the doses of sadness condensed from year to year in family gatherings, the forced smiles, the awkwardness of seeing everybody pretending in vain, the feeling that a corpse is lying there on the table, and everybody's acting though it were nothing. From flirtation to divorce, from cohabitation to step families, everyone feels the inanity of the sad family nucleus. But most seem to believe that it would be sadder to give it all up. The family is no longer so much the suffocation of maternal control or the patriarchy of beatings. It is this infantile abandon to a fuzzy dependency where everything is familiar. This carefree moment in the face of a world that nobody can deny is breaking down. A world where becoming self-sufficient is a euphemism for finding a boss. They want to use this familiarity of the biological family as an excuse to undermine anything that burns passionately within us. And under the pretext they've raised us, make us renounce the possibility of growing up, as well as everything that is serious in childhood. We need to guard against such corrosion. The couple is like the final stage of the great social debacle. It is the oasis in the middle of the human desert. Under the auspices of intimacy, we come to it looking for everything that has so obviously deserted contemporary social relations: warmth, simplicity, truth, a life without theater or spectator. But once the romantic enchantment has passed, intimacy strips itself bare. It is itself a social invention. It speaks the language of glamour magazines and psychology. Like everything else, it is bolstered with strategies to the point of nausea. There is no more truth here than elsewhere. Here too lies the laws of estrangement dominate. And when, by good fortune, one discovers this truth, it demands a sharing that belies the very form of the couple. What allows beings to love each other is also what makes them lovable, and what ruins the utopia of autism for two. It's fucking brutal, man. In reality, the decomposition of social forms is a blessing. It is for us the ideal condition for a wild, massive experimentation with new arrangements and new fidelities. The famous parental resignation has imposed on us a confrontation with the world that demands precocious lucidity and foreshadows lovely revolts to come. In the death of the couple, we see the birth of troubling forms of collective affectivity. Now that sex is all used up and masculinity and femininity parade around in such moth-eaten clothes, now 3 decades of non-stop pornographic innovation have exhausted all allure of transgression and liberation. We count on making that, which is unconditional in relationships, the armor of a political solidarity. And impenetrable to state interference as a gypsy camp. There is no reason that interminable subsidies, it's just broken in a weird spot, I'm sorry, and numerous relatives are compelled to offload onto their proletarianized progeny can't become a form of patronage in favor of social subversion. Becoming autonomous could just as easily mean learning to fight in the streets, to occupy empty houses, to cease working, to love each other madly, and to shoplift.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Abercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. you supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Abercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Abercast. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I'm proud of the Abercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you can sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.